All right, today we're tackling a really big question. How did Florida go from the ultimate political toss-up to a blueprint for single-party rule? We're going to break down the mechanics of this transformation, looking at it as a kind of political engineering project.
I mean, think back to the year 2000. The entire presidency came down to just 537 votes in Florida. It was the definition of a swing state. But if you look at Florida now, it's a completely different world. It's become a consolidated single-party state. So the big question is, how on earth did that happen? How did one of the most competitive states in the country change so dramatically and so fast?
Well, according to the analysis we're looking at today, this wasn't just some natural shift in demographics or a slow change in voter attitudes. The argument is that this was a deliberate, decades-long project. It was, for lack of a better word, engineered. And that's what we're going to unpack today, the actual mechanics of that project.
So we've broken this down into 5 key pillars that really define this model. We'll look at how power was centralized in the governor's office, how key institutions like courts and universities were captured, the war on local government power, how the electorate itself was shaped, and finally, how this whole system is now being exported to other states.
Okay, so let's start with that first pillar, centralizing power in the executive. This is all about expanding the governor's authority way beyond its traditional limits, often by taking power away from other officials who were, also elected.
And one of the most direct ways we saw this happen was with the removal of elected officials. The governor, using the justification of neglect of duty, just unilaterally suspended 2 state attorneys. Now, these weren't appointees. These were people who were elected by their local communities. And when they challenged it, the state Supreme Court basically backed the governor, setting this really powerful precedent that, an executive can effectively overrule a local election.
Then there's the revival of the Florida State Guard. This thing hadn't been around since 1947, right after World War II. But what's so fascinating here is its chain of command. See, unlike the National Guard, which can be called up by the president, this State Guard answers only to the governor. It's essentially a private force, and its mission has grown from just disaster relief to things like assisting in migrant interdictions. It gives the governor a tool that's completely outside of federal control.
But centralizing power in the governor's office was really just the beginning. The next crucial step was to make sure all the other major state institutions, we're talking courts, universities, you name it, were all marching to the same beat. And you can see this happen with lightning speed in the state's judiciary. Back in 2019, the governor got to appoint 3 new justices all at once, totally reshaping the Florida Supreme Court almost overnight. And these weren't just random picks. They were all vetted by the Federalist Society. The impact was immediate. This new court started rolling back major precedents, including one from 1989 that protected abortion rights, and even changing the rules for the death penalty, no longer requiring a unanimous jury.
Now, if you want a textbook example of this in the education world, look no further than the takeover of New College. This was a small, public liberal arts college. The governor appointed a brand new, highly ideological board. They came in, they fired the president, they immediately got rid of the school's diversity programs, and they were very, very open about it. They literally framed what they were doing as a blueprint for reconquering public higher education all across the country.
All right, so once you have the executive and the institutions in line, what's next? Well, the next pillar is about neutralizing any opposition that might come from the local level, from cities and counties. This was a full-on war on home rule, using state law to strip local governments of their power. And the key weapon in this fight is something called state preemption. It's a legal concept, but the idea is simple. The state legislature basically says we and only we can make laws about this particular subject. Whether it's gun control or the minimum wage, they just declare the field off limits, which voids any local rules on the books.
And this is where it gets really intense. Look at what they did with firearms policy. The state didn't just preempt local gun laws. They made it punishable for local officials to even try. So if you're a city council member and you vote for a local gun ordinance, you could be personally fined $5,000 out of your own pocket and even get removed from office. That creates an incredible chilling effect, right? It just shuts down the debate entirely. The state also showed it wasn't afraid to just flat out overrule the voters. In Key West, the citizens voted in 3 separate referendums to limit the size of cruise ships coming into their port. So what did the state legislature do? They just passed a new law that retroactively nullified the results of that election. Done. The cruise industry was protected, and the voters were ignored. So you've consolidated executive power, captured the institutions, and neutralized local governments. But the source argues that controlling policy isn't enough. You also have to control the electorate itself, basically shaping who gets to vote and making sure some votes count more than others. Gerrymandering is a classic tool for this, and this chart really lays it bare. In 2022, after the governor got directly involved in drawing the new congressional maps, his party got about 51% of the statewide vote. But that translated into 71% of the congressional seats. That's a huge disconnect. And a big part of how they did it was by breaking up a specific district that had historically allowed black voters in that area to elect their own representative. But it goes way beyond just drawing maps. The state actually created a brand new police force, the Office of Election Crimes and Security. Think about that, an election police force. One of their first big moves was to stage these high-profile arrests of formerly incarcerated people who had been told they could vote. Some were even issued voter cards by the state. Combine that with what many call a pay-to-vote system of fines and fees, and the result is a climate of real fear and confusion around the simple act of voting.
And of course, engineering the electorate also means trying to control the information they get. The analysis points to a really sophisticated media environment, especially on Spanish-language radio and on platforms like WhatsApp. It creates this kind of information bubble that insulates certain communities with targeted disinformation, a common tactic being to just brand any and all political opponents as socialists.
Okay, so this whole system was built and perfected in Florida. But, and this is the final pillar, it was never designed to just stay in Florida. The whole point was to create a model that could be exported.
And you can see that export process in action right here. This chart is like looking at the policy pipeline. You see a bill get passed in Florida, banning DEI programs at universities, for example, and then, boom, you see almost the exact same legislation pop up in Texas, in Tennessee, and other states. It's a copy-paste job.
And this isn't just a coincidence. There's a whole network of organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, and the Heritage Foundation that facilitate this. They create the model legislation, the legislative templates, and then shop them around the country. Florida essentially acts as the test kitchen. So let's just pull all this together for a second. What the source material is describing here is a fully integrated system of governance. It's a political machine where all the branches, executive, legislative, judicial, are pulled into alignment. State power is then used to shut down local opposition and carefully manage the electorate. It's a system that's designed not just to win an election, but for permanence. And it's designed to be exported.
But the analysis also points out that this model isn't bulletproof. It's facing some pretty serious real-world pressures. You've got a massive, unsolved property insurance crisis that's hitting almost every homeowner. There are reports of a brain drain from the state's top universities. And on some key issues, the government seems to be pretty disconnected from where the average voter actually stands.
So the source material calls this a blueprint. We've just walked through the plans piece by piece, which leaves us with one final and pretty profound question. What exactly is being built?